My first talk will be on the use of MR in acute stroke, and I'm going to try to convince you that it's much better to use MR than to use CT in acute stroke. First of all, let me present you the picture of what happens in the US, just to give you a rough idea. Here is a paper published in 2012, and you can see that the use of MR in acute stroke doubles in 10 years. The use of MR, in acute stroke doubles over 10 years, from 28% of patients with acute stroke scanned with MR, raising to 66%. But the big surprise is that the CT scan is stable, so obviously there is no substitution, and what probably happens is that people get first scanned using CT, and whenever we can put them in the in MR, later on during hospital stay, they will eventually have an MR. Okay, how do you go to the next slide? Next slide. There is a lot of common misconceptions about MR in acute stroke. The first one is that it takes a long time, about 30 minutes, that is often not feasible because patient might be restless, and also that it does not follow the guidelines. I'm going to try to prove that everything is wrong. The recommended timing when you manage a patient who is suspected of having an acute stroke is to bypass the emergency care, go straight to the stroke team, have the imaging session, and the recommended timing of the scan duration plus image reading is about 20 minutes. That means that you have to start looking at the images as soon as the exam starts, especially if you're doing MR. You don't wait until the exam is finished before you start looking at the images. Comment on passe à la diapo suivante? Okay, this one. Okay, to manage to make it in 20 minutes, you have to have a standard protocol, always the same one. And this is the one we typically use for every patient suspected of an acute stroke, is to perform first a diffusion, a T2 star weighted image to rule out a hemorrhage, a flare sequence, and we can discuss about the usefulness of the flare sequence, a tough MR focused on the brain, and I tried. And then we give gadolinium, scan it with perfusion MR, and eventually we complete the whole exam by head and neck post-gadolinium contrast MR angiography. So we give gadolinium twice in this exam. Using this type of protocols, the MR is feasible acutely in 90% of patients, provided that the MR is close to the emergency room and the cath lab, that you don't depend on ambulance system. It's open 24 hours a day. Theoretically, people should be scanned the same way during the day and during the night. And also that the protocols are fast. That means that the technicians are used to manage this type of patients. I was saying that it's feasible in 90% of patients, even in restless patients. If you look at this example, this patient had a plain CT. We were not 85 years old, and aphasia, a sudden aphasia, a history of stroke, and we were not totally convinced that it was an acute stroke. On the plain CT, there was here what can look like a sequel. And clinicians were hesitating on whether to give TPA or not to this patient. So we tried to push him to the MR, hoping that we can block him in the magnet, and we managed to do it. And as you can see here, there is an acute stroke, so we are sure we're giving TPA to an acute stroke and not to a stroke-like patient. If in restless patient, it's very useful to have on your MR system fast sequences for restless patients. For example, here you can turn the conventional flare that lasts 2 minutes into an ecoplanar-based flare that lasts 15 seconds, so you can manage to have all the information very quickly. And there is in literature some data showing that you can do everything in 6 minutes, not 8 minutes, but in 6 minutes, if you turn all your sequences using EPI, ecoplanar-based imaging. You use EPI for DWI, for T2 star weighted sequence, but also for FLAIR. Then you give contrast and you perform first the MR angiography, and then you perform the perfusion weighted imaging to try to detect some penumbra. I will talk about that later. So what is that good for? First, we mentioned that it might not follow the recommendation. We can use either CT or MR as first-line diagnostic tool before discussing acute stroke treatment. First, to rule out hemorrhage, and you can rule out hemorrhage using MR as well as using CT. Here are a few examples of hematoma using MR. A large one, a small one here associated with a small ischemic lesion, and here is a deeply located hematoma. In restless patient again, you can switch your conventional T2 star weighted sequence into EPI-based T2 star sequence, and it lasts 10 seconds, and you can also detect the hematoma. Okay, but the point of using MR, of course, is not to detect hematoma, but to go much further into the diagnosis of arterial ischemic stroke. We first have to confirm that the patient really does have an ischemia, and this is the typical semiology of pattern of an acute stroke, where you will see on diffusion-weighted imaging, as you all know, the bright lesion. You will also detect here the clot as a dark signal into the MCA. You will confirm the arterial occlusion, and you will also be able to detect these, how do we call them, this curvilinear bright signal on FLAIR that suggests that there is an occlusion upstream on the artery here on the MCA. So this is the typical semiology. The sensitivity for ischemia of this protocol is excellent, and the specificity is not perfect, since, as you know, all bright lesions on diffusion do not correspond to arterial ischemic stroke. And the last point is that the reproducibility is excellent and much better than on plain CT. As for arterial occlusion, you will be able to localize precisely the occlusion. And here is an example of an internal carotid plus M1 occlusion, and beside it you can see the clot directly on the T2 star weighted sequence. The occlusion can be proximal, it could be distally located, and you have the clot here, corresponding clot, or also it could be located in the M2 proximal segment, and again you can detect the clot here on the susceptibility weighted sequence. What's important here is that the more proximal the occlusion and the longer the clot, the less chance of recanalization after thrombolysis. And as we know, there is about 3 to 4% chance of recanalization after IV thrombolysis if the clot is proximally located and very long, and it raises to about 40% when the clot is distally located, such as in M2 proximal location. I mentioned about cervical MR angiography, which was not the case a few years ago, but now we are more and more treating patients with thrombectomy. We need additional information, and we probably need in all patients a view of the arteries going to the clot. The first information we need is to confirm the arterial occlusion, and as you may know, tough MR angiography might overestimate the occlusion, and some suboccluded artery might look occluded, as is the case here. You can see that the internal carotid artery seems occluded, and this is not the case here. When you give contrast, you confirm that the M1 is proximally occluded, but the carotid pathway is okay. The second information you get for cervical MR angiography after gadolinium is the shape of the aortic arch, which allows our colleague to choose the type of material they're going to use to get to the clot. And the last information is it's about similar, but additional information is the quality of the pathway to the clot, and it's important to know that if the bulb is occluded or if it's easy to get to the clot. And here again on the arteriography you can see that there is the same information on the MR angiography than on DSA before reaching the clot, which is located in the M1 proximal segment. Now we have, I showed you the typical, I showed you the typical patterns of acute ischemic stroke, and this slide is to show you that using MR, as you probably all know, allows you to distinguish between arterial ischemic stroke and what we call stroke mimics. On the first row of this slide, you have a typical case of acute stroke. Bright on diffusion, low ADC value, nothing visible on flare sequence, no blood on T2 star weighted, and not much information on the MR angiography. On the second line, you have a case that is slightly different. Here you can see that the bright signal is it looks cortical, is distributed in two different arterial territory. These lesions could be in the MCA arterial territory, but as you can see there is a bright lesion here in the pulvinar and also in the occipital lobe, which is a second arterial territory, which makes the diagnosis of arterial stroke a little bit suspicious. There is nothing on the flare. And if this patient presents as an acute stroke and the question is whether to give TPA or not, you have to confirm that there is an arterial occlusion, which was not the case here, and complete the exam with a perfusion sequence. Here it's an ASL that shows that there is a hyperperfusion and not a hypoperfusion, which would be expected in a case of acute stroke. So here is a typical example of post-ictal edema in a patient that probably had seizures, and this is not a case of stroke but a stroke mimic. The next day, without giving TPA, everything vanished and the MR normalized without any treatment. Well, this is I think quite important, and if you look at this paper, you can see that about 500 patients treated, that means they had the TPA on the base of plain CT. 14% of them were treated for a stroke mimics, so that means that they didn't have the right treatment. And that's, I think, using MR, you can avoid giving the wrong treatment to the wrong patient, and also that will give you the ability to have a free bed for a real stroke and manage correctly all the medical resources of your hospital. The other information you get very easily, simply looking at the diffusion, is sometimes the stroke etiology. When you have a lesion like this one, and you also perform the cervical MR, you can see here a high-grade stenosis, and this should be managed urgently because this stenosis is symptomatic. When you see this type of lesions, which is at the border of two arterial territory, the anterior cerebral arterial territory and the MCA territory, obviously this is what we call a junctional stroke at the confine, at the border of these two arterial territories related to this high-grade stenosis, intracranial stenosis. When you see a pattern like that, of course, you will search for a hard cause, the cardiac cause of embolic embols. And the last point is when you see this small tiny lesion deeply located, and especially if the flare shows you leukoariosis, you will immediately think about a disease of small arteries. Let's move to the second part of my talk, and I will try to convince you that using perfusion is we also provide you very important information. A few words about the physiopathology of acute stroke. Here, if this is the time zero of the arterial occlusion, as you know, the patient will have, some of the brain will be in penumbra, that means at risk of ischemia, and there is a second part of the brain that will correspond to infarct core. And the main question is, at the time you may be able to recanalize this patient, what is the proportion of the green area, which is the brain, that can be saved, and which is the proportion of the infarct core that cannot be saved and that will ineluctably, in English, I'm not sure it's English, that will evolve, irrespective of what you do, towards infarction and death of the neurons. So the question is here, and to do that, we're going to use perfusion. The idea is to save the penumbra. The penumbra can be seen until 24 hours. Of course, it decreases with time, but it varies from patient to patient. And what we know is that if you save the penumbra, then you will improve the patient outcome. So the idea is very simple. You treat the patient, you try to save the penumbra and limit the core expansion. A few years ago, there was no mention at all in the recommendation of the use of perfusion imaging, whether CT or MR. Now, it's written that perfusion may be considered for the selection of patients beyond the time windows for IV thrombolysis, and of course, behind the time windows for thrombectomy as well. The idea is, as you all know, is the following, is to be able to image the core and the penumbra being the area that's hypoperfused, so that looks red on these time maps, and that is larger than the area that is bright on diffusion, the bright area on diffusion corresponding to the infarct core. Here, we consider that this patient has got a mismatch between a large perfusion defect and a small area on diffusion, and this patient here has got the same size area on diffusion and on perfusion, so is considered to be mismatch negative. What is interesting is that these two patients have exactly the same clinical score, the same stroke severity, and it's impossible on clinical basis to distinguish the patient that's got a large penumbra or a small penumbra, and only imaging can do that. Okay, to measure the core, to measure the size of the penumbra, we currently use, if you use MR, we currently based our analysis on a parameter that's called the Tmax, and it's also the same parameter that's used if you use CT perfusion. And usually the threshold that's typically employed today is a 6 seconds. So what you do is you measure slice by slice, the area that's over Tmax 6 seconds. Then you compare it to the area that's measured on diffusion lesion, and you can compute a ratio, which is here the volume of hypoperfusion divided by the volume of diffusion. If the ratio is over 1.8, we consider that this patient is mismatch positive. Also, if you look at this criteria, and there are many criteria, but this is probably the most commonly accepted one currently, there is also an idea that we should not treat large volume of ischemia, so we should only treat small patients with small core, so they have to have a mismatch and also a small core. And I forget the last criteria, which is a bit complicated. The idea of excluding a patient with large core is that some people believe that this patient will evolve poorly, irrespective of what you do, whether treated or not, and that the treatment might be futile. Patients, for example, this patient have a very high chance to bleed, whether treated or not, or evolving towards a malignant infarct when they have basically a very large infarction to start with. This is a very hot topic, and my purpose is not to tell you that we should not treat patients with large core infarct, but just provide you some ideas, current ideas and hot topics. So I was telling you that we can measure the mismatch. It looks easy on my slides. So what about in practice and in real time? Remember that we have 20 minutes to perform the exam and then provide the medical report. Of course, if you do it manually and visually, it's impossible to do everything in 20 minutes. So what's available as automated software? First, for one example of an automated software that's in the literature, and if you look at this paper, the MRSQ, trial, they used the software, and the software failed in 42% of patients. Just to give you an idea, that was in a trial, so imagine on your site, if it fails in a trial, there is very little chance you can manage to do it at home. We need a software that has all these capabilities, and for the time being, I think they don't exist. Some of them are very accurate, very usable, but cost a lot of money, so they are not affordable yet. And this is a few examples of what exists. This is a French company providing automated data sent directly to your packs, so you have the volume of the perfusion, the hypoperfusion, the volume of the diffusion, the ratio, mismatch positive or mismatch negative, and you don't have to think or do anything. Some of the main manufacturers are trying to set some prototypes, and you have probably heard about the Rapid software, which was made by Stanford University. But they still cost a lot of money, and the economic model is, I think, not yet affordable for maybe in Israel, but in France for the time being. We use it for research, but I don't think anyone uses it for clinical care. So we're trying to avoid having to manually contour all that and develop some surrogate markers of the core. How can we do it fast? One way to do it fast is to use the aspect scoring. I don't know if you heard about the aspect scoring, so just to remind you, the idea is to select two slices. It's been invented for the CT scan transposed to MR. So you divide in 10 areas on two sections. The first section is the one at the level of the gray nuclei, and the second slice is the one where you don't see the gray nuclei anymore. You look at this area, and every time you see a bright spot on diffusion, it's quoted 1 point. The patient starts with 10 points if he's got nothing, and 0 if all the 10 areas are sick. So, for example, if you apply the scoring aspect to this patient will have an aspect score of 4, and there is some equivalence between the aspect score and the volume on diffusion. So that's one of the surrogate markers that you will see in all publications that are published currently. If we want to compare the imaging of the infarct core using MR and using CT, what are the main ideas? First, the infarct core you see directly on diffusion, which is not the case on CT. So people who want to use CT for that purpose, they claim that you can use CT perfusion and they use the CBV map and try to contour the limit of the infarct core. Unfortunately, the infarct core is underestimated using CBV maps. It's probably best using CBF. And also, there is a very poor signal-to-noise ratio on CT perfusion maps. As you see here, a comparison between diffusion and CT perfusion. And when you compare the accuracy of MR, for example, for detecting a lesion more than 70 ml using MR and CT, you can see that CT-based CBF volumes range from 11 to 124 ml, while the MR should be all in more than 70 ml. Of course, it depends on the quality of CT perfusion map, depends on the collateral circulation, on the contrast element, on the cardiac output. This is also true for MR, but it's probably for measuring the infarct core. Of course, diffusion is much better than CT perfusion. Using MR, we also tried to develop some surrogate marker of the penumbra. I mentioned using comparing the diffusion with the perfusion maps and superimposing the two areas. You can also, instead of measuring, you can also apply the aspect score to perfusion map and comparing to the aspect score on diffusion and detect the penumbra very basically without contouring anything. And some of these ideas are also seducing. One of the idea here is to compare. Here you have always the diffusion sequence, and you use something else than post-contrast perfusion-weighted imaging. Here you will compare the size of the lesion on diffusion with the proximal or distal, the topography of the arterial occlusion. And there is a mismatch here between the occlusion, which is proximal, and the small size of the lesion, and you can say in such a case that there is a penumbra and there is tissue at risk of ischemia. This idea also was published very early, more than 15 years ago, but it's coming back to fashion, so I'm going to explain you that. This is the idea of a clinical diffusion mismatch. The clinical diffusion mismatch means that on diffusion there is a small infarct, but the clinical deficit is severe, is more than 8 or more than 10. If the clinical deficit is severe and the lesion is small, then there must be a penumbra, and then there must be tissue to be saved. And I will show you in 1 second why this mismatch is important. So remember the clinical diffusion mismatch. It's very simple. You simply need a diffusion and clinical scoring that we always have, of course. And people trying to develop other score, our group tried to develop a mismatch between these small bright vessels on flare and the extent of the diffusion lesion, and you can also use people trying also to use ASL. About the clinical diffusion mismatch, I'm talking about that because of the DAWN trial that was recently published, and if you didn't hear about that, I would like to present briefly this study because it's an important one. It compared thrombectomy versus standard care, and what's interesting is that the symptoms were between 6 and 24 hours. That means we are going to extend the indication of treatment up to 24 hours. Patient had to have a proximal occlusion, a small infarct on diffusion-weighted lesion. I'm not going to enter into details, and a clinical diffusion mismatch. That's what I was talking to you about on the slide before. And this trial managed to show the efficacy of thrombectomy versus standard care with an impressive result, because the number needed to treat to avoid any lower disability was 2, which is a much better result than all the trial before. And why is this? How can we explain this result? Is because they have used selection based on brain to be saved rather than on the clinical the timing. I mean the clock and the deficit. They have selected patients with large penumbra that respond to treatment. If we compute, there is the data from all the recent thrombectomy trial, and I'm not going to detail all the thrombectomy trials that have been published in the New England, most of them in the New England Journal of Medicine in the last 2 years. What you can see is that here is the number of patients needed to treat to save one or to avoid one severe handicap. And what is interesting on this slide is that if you use advanced imaging, then the treatment is much more efficient. That means that the more you select the patient, the more efficient the treatment will be. And here you have the DAWN trial, which is the best one, right at the bottom of the scale. One of the main need, I think, in the future of MR, and I think there will be no discussion, is a patient with unknown stroke onset time. And a lot of patients in the DAWN study I just mentioned were in fact people with unknown stroke onset time. They represent, these people wake up and we don't know the time of their deficit. They might represent up to 1/3 of the patients presenting with an acute stroke. So we know that some patients benefit from recanalization, and one of the ideas is to use what we call a mismatch between the diffusion and the flare sequence. That means that they have a stroke here on the diffusion and they have no signal changes on the flare. And the idea behind that is to use MR as a time machine in patients where we don't know when the stroke started. There is ongoing trials, and I think they will be published this year, so we should have the answer to this question. And the main question is, if we select and treat this patient, is it more efficient than not treating them based on the fact that they have a mismatch between diffusion and flare? Sorry. And I will finish with the basilar artery occlusion, which is a bad event and with a very poor prognosis. One also important point is that before treatment decision we get very important information on the extent of the lesion and of the brain stem, which are key prognosis factors, and probably in future if we scan patients with large lesion on diffusion with basilar arterial occlusion, the treatment might be considered as futile. Here the lesion is limited, it's not very bright on diffusion, we are very early, there is an occlusion of the arterial, the basilar trunk. You can see also a bright signal on flare, and this is the MR angiography after treatment. So probably there will be some scheme whether to treat or not based on diffusion in the years to come. So overall, if we compare plain CT versus MR, what we get as information, first we are sure we're giving TPA or thrombectomy to patients with ischemic stroke because we get a definite diagnosis. We get keys to the etiology, as I showed you. It helps patient triage because we can see directly the infarct core, and also it's got the prognosis value. You get all that in 8 minutes. And obviously, comparing the two, MR is much better than plain CT. Now, if we compare advanced CT versus MR, the situation is a bit different. And let me just explain you this table. And comparing the advanced CT, including perfusion and angio-CT. First, for radiation, you have the problem of radiation and iodine contrast on CT, and MR you have gadolinium, so that probably favors the use of MR. The feasibility and the cost, of course, favors CT, there is no discussion about that. The scientific validation on CT, maybe I should change slightly my slide, but it's still at infancy. It's moving quickly, but we still have more validation, scientific validation with MR. For the infarct core, clearly MR is better. We directly see the core on diffusion. For the penumbra, again, it's more validated using MR. And for the vessel status, I think there is no discussion. CT is better. There is no overestimation of an occlusion. When you see an occlusion on CT, it is truly an occlusion. So if we compare the two, probably the balance is more equilibrated. I still prefer MR because it's much easier to read. So you might have seen this paper, stroke thrombolysis, save a minute, save a day, and maybe one day we are going to be able to publish something called Advanced Imaging-Based Treatment, Scan for a Minute, Save a Day. Thank you for your attention.